Hello, we are the Scroll Ensemble, and our channel is all about classical music improvisation. If you're enjoying our videos, feel free to subscribe, share, like, or join us on Patreon for improv assignments, personal advice, and more material. I will talk about our teaching at the conservatory, specifically about this year's students' personal improv projects. I think it will be interesting for you too to see different types of improvisation and which steps you could take in a longer trajectory to learn to improvise. In the first place, a huge thank you to our students for being so open, creative, hardworking, and for their willingness to show their work here on our channel. You are the best. If you want to skip ahead to the projects, you can find links in the description below. After an introduction about our teaching, I'll talk about each project and show a fragment of the student's final video, so music. We like to teach by example, so we also did a project, James and I. The full video clips are on Patreon. James and I teach historical improvisation at the conservatory in The Hague. This means that it is inspired by what we can find out about improvisation from the past, through compositions, theory books, stories, and finally our own interpretation and imagination. The class is, sadly, only 1 year, divided into 2 halves. In the first semester, we introduce different types of improvisation and let the students experience those. This year, we focused especially on 3 strands: improvised counterpoint, partimento, and imitation, which are, of course, also interrelated. Beside this, we also work more holistically on ideas like creativity, spontaneity, interaction, trust, etc. In the second semester, the students each choose their own improvisation project. This way they can focus on a specific type of improvisation and their instruments' improvisatory idiosyncrasies. The students comment on each other's work and progress, and for example, they teach the class a small lesson about their project, so they also teach and inspire each other. The pandemic posed a problem, of course, as for everybody, because usually we improvise lots live and together. But it also had positive effects. We got the students to record videos of their progress. By seeing these before the lesson, we could prepare each lesson in more detail, and the students were forced to work on a recordable step each week. All students used recording, composition, improvisation, and evaluation to come to their wonderful end products. Xiangji's project was also part of her master research, which meant that she had some more time and it was quite complicated. Xiangji researched how to improvise a new second voice to an existing sonata for one instrument and accompaniment. Improvising or composing a new voice to an existing piece was a well-known practice in earlier times, although in the baroque period composed versions are more well-known. Xiangji looked at an interesting set of pieces by Nicolas Matteis, his Airs for the Violin. The 3rd and 4th book of this set had first been published for 1 violin and continuo, but were later published with an added 2nd violin part. In her process, she went from analyzing Matteis's added 2nd part, to composing her own 2nd parts, to improvising smaller sections on her own, and then improvising according to basic guidelines that she wrote out before, so she knows they will fit, to improvising more freely on the entire piece. Here is a snippet of her final video in which she took a piece from the 3rd book and improvised a new 2nd voice. Anežka's project resulted in a suite of 2 passacaglias in different styles and instrumentations. I thought this was a very nice example of how historical improvisation can lead to new musical ideas and forms. In her project, Anežka first took Biber's Guardian Angel Passacaglia for solo violin as inspiration for a solo passacaglia improvisation on the flute. She looked at motifs and their development, the different placement of bass notes, the use of register, and how these and other parameters can be developed from one variation to another to create a larger form. She first composed and tried variation possibilities to build a library of options. And then she could improvise more freely, choosing these options and varying them in the moment. The second passacaglia was inspired by Lully's orchestral passacaglias. Due to the pandemic, only in a pre-recorded harpsichord format in this case. Daisuke improvised a suite on the harmony of the Goldberg variations. Basically, in Bach's air, there's a skeleton which we can extract to make new music on top of. His suite consisted of a prelude in the style of an allemande for solo saxophone, and then a minuet, a gigue, a free improvisation, and in the end the aria comes back, and all of those are in the form of a trio for violin, saxophone and piano. On a side note, it is also interesting to see an instrument such as the saxophone interact with baroque improvisation, and by the way, he did a really great job. Also to remind us, we can play and improvise this music on whatever instrument or instrument combination. The allemande was inspired by Bach's cello suites for solo cello, specifically analyzing figures Bach used expressing both the rhythm of the dance and the harmony of the basic structure on one melodic instrument. For the minuet and gigue, Daisuke did research into these forms in some of Bach's keyboard works. How many bars are phrased together? What are typical rhythms and motifs? And how is the melody distributed? I was also very interested in his idea of free improvisation for the fourth movement. Here the piece is loosely based on the original bass, but the tempo and harmonies are much freer and not decided before. was really cool to add Victor to our class as a PhD student whose focus is 19th century music. A lot of improvisation was still going on in the 19th century, and especially for instruments like the harp and cello, we suddenly start finding more information about their improvisatory practices in books and treatises. Victor worked on improvising a cadenza in Romberg's Spanish Rondo, and Romberg was a famous 19th century cellist. Victor had a look at some of Czerny's examples of cadenzas, and also analyzed some cadential ideas in Romberg's own written oeuvre. One could discern two types of cadenzas. One which is merely a virtuosic display of mostly scalar figures, and another which takes up a theme from the original piece, or a motive, and develops it in a new direction compared to the original, and this type is emblematic for Mozart's approach. At first, Victor focused on the ability to take such a theme or motive and develop it, and mostly used a simple, for a cadenza typical 1-4-5-1 underpinning. Finally, Victor studied some harmonic sequences, and he worked on being able to react in the moment to a given character to train his ability to improvise in the moment. And he got some really wonderful results, which inspired the question, how far can you go? How long before it's not actually a cadenza anymore, but maybe a separate piece? And if Romberg's own cadenzas seem quite simplistic and mostly of the virtuosic type, can you take a different route? Is that still historical? Here our sense of style has to be balanced with the wish to express and tell our own story, do our own thing. And you might even decide this in the moment, so then the improvisation also is your concept. Caleb had the challenge of his instrument, the natural or baroque trumpet, to deal with. It can't produce many notes outside its natural scale, and even in that scale there are quite some gaps. So as soon as you are not playing the chord and the basic scale of the trumpet, you really have to think about which notes you can still even produce. Caleb therefore focused on smaller chord combinations to really get into the depth of what is possible. I was very impressed by his tenacious spirit and creativity. Caleb started off with the chords C and G, and then learned the different possible melodic routes on his instrument, having some options by heart. And then he was freer to experiment more and add some rhythms and ornaments on top of that. And finally he looked at how Purcell used the same basic material, and how and what Purcell wrote for the trumpet to further inspire him. My own project was based around Giovanni Furno's Partimenti on a melodic instrument. So his are not originally for a melodic instrument, but I translated it to my melodic instrument. A partimento is a small recipe for a piece, and in this case to learn specific building blocks, which you can later use freely in your own improvisations or compositions. At the same time I looked at the occurrence of partimento building blocks in Telemann's Fantasias for solo flute. I focused specifically on the idea of suggesting two voices by jumping between one and the other, which Telemann uses often. This way I had to think in a contrapuntal way, about two different voices, a bass and a melody, and that was very new for me. In this video I first play the partimento in this two-part way, as I described before, then with arpeggios, which I used to do, and finally I make a fantasia out of the partimento, being inspired by some of Telemann's examples. During the final presentation I also improvised a new fantasia, so then I learned the building blocks and some ideas from Telemann, and I improvised a new piece. James is researching contrapuntal devices found in duos, especially those of Orlando di Lasso, and how they can be used in improvising a two-part polyphonic ricercar. Lasso's duos generally consist of many points of imitation, in which the length and the interval of imitation keep changing. How do you improvise this? So we are used to improvising a canon where we say, after so many notes you will start playing, and you will play at the fifth or at the third, and that will then stay that way. The imitation points Di Lasso used are generally ornamented versions of simpler motifs. This might be, for example, an ascending third, which then gives several options of answering, including at the unison or a fifth above or below. In this example, James practices improvising with the motive of a third. First, with a simple third as a theme in a single voice, and exploring imitation options in two parts. And then he shows the same, but with more complex motives on the third, created through ornamentation. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to subscribe, share, like, and especially we love hearing your thoughts and questions. See you in the next one. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye.